you rarely see jstreet praising Israel. What you read is almost always condemnation. You can't be pro-Israel and prioritize the condemnation over the praise, which is what jstreet almost always does.
When you say that you are pro-Israel, you actually support a strong and prosperous and safe Israel. So when you're an organization that says, we blame Israel for all of the pathologies of its neighbors, and we think that the only actor in all of this is the Jewish state, and the only responsible party here for any of this are the Jews, that is not really being pro-Israel.
They call themselves a pro-peace organization. Now that's something that's very appealing. It's very seductive. It's something that college students would love to be a part of.
It allows them to be activists without having to really deal with the difficult issues, the root issues.
Knowledge doesn't matter at all. It just matters to say a sweet tagline and to not, be offending anybody. That's the biggest problem on campus, being offensive.
Today, the younger generation is embarrassed about supporting Israel. So a lot of Jewish college students and others are looking for ways of being able to say, well, we kind of support Israel, but we really support peace and humanitarian values, and if that means that we have to condemn Israel singularly and uniquely, we'll do it. It's a way of becoming acceptable.
If a Jewish student feels that repairing the world and that being a universalist and being progressive is equivalent to being Jewish, then they don't have to be proudly Jewish, and they don't have to be proudly Zionist.
On some campuses, when jstreet U was launched, they dropped the usual pro-Israel part of their slogan. A jstreet campus leader wrote at that time, "We don't want to isolate people because they don't feel quite comfortable with pro-Israel. So we say pro-peace."
Bravery is to be a Zionist on college campuses today. Bravery is to stand up for Israel on college campuses today.
We raise our children to believe that they should not treat other people the way that we would not want to be treated ourselves. But as Peter Beinart has so eloquently challenged us, we make a real mistake when we tell those same children that they have to check their Jewish values at the door of Zionism.
The greatest Jewish value of all is pikuach nefesh, the saving of lives, and the protection of 6 million Jews who now make their home in the Jewish state, and anything that undercuts the ability of Israel to defend itself against nuclear attack, against terrorist attack, is inconsistent with Jewish values.
For younger American Jews who've grown up with Israel as a regional superpower, it's not enough to say we need Israel as a refuge, because they can't imagine needing Israel as a refuge. What they can imagine, I think, is being inspired and connected to an Israel that, under difficult circumstances, is living out the democratic ideals that they believe are the highest form of the Jewish ethical tradition.
That's the good Jew, the Jew who helps everyone else, the Jew who puts others before themselves, the Jew who cares more about strangers than they do about family.
There's also another piece which explains why this conflict is so painful to young Americans and to young people all over the world. We live in a distinctly post-identity world. We live in a world in which I think the real political philosopher is John Lennon. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. And I think on some deep level, young people imagine if we can just end countries, we'll bring peace.
They don't want to believe that other people have different worldviews than them, because their worldviews are all about pluralism. Almost this utopia where everybody is the same and where everybody has the same values, so there really isn't anything to have a conflict about.
It's inconceivable to me that this conflict can still be in the same place that it is now, 17 or 18 years from now. And so I have to believe that peace is possible. So jstreet has to be out there much more. It has to be much louder.
Because they are so sensitive and because they are so good-hearted, All I have to do is to go out there and apply this good-heartedness in the world, and it will be improved. And wicked Israel is not as good-hearted as I am. The stupidity of this kind of innocence in a world which is so complicated, when you belong to a people with such a tortured history of trying to arrive at the good in the midst of being persecuted and prosecuted falsely over so many centuries. I mean, it is almost intolerable.
The IRS released, perhaps by accident, J Street's tax forms, and there was $250,000 of donations from Mr. Soros.
George Soros is a billionaire investment manager who is a major supporter of far-left political causes and organizations. He has spoken out against Israel and provides large donations to anti-Israel organizations.
It turns out that George Soros was the main donor behind the organization, and Jeremy Ben-Ami lied about that for several years.
$50% of their budget came from outside the United States, a fact that they hid and lied about until it was made public some years later.
$800,000 from a woman in Hong Kong. I have no clue why this woman, a Philippine woman who lives in Hong Kong near the racetrack, was giving J Street a third of their budget 2 years ago. Something is amiss here.
The big problem with J Street is it doesn't tell the truth. It is deceptive. It hides its positions. It does it through studied ambiguity. And an organization that uses that kind of deception is guilty of falsity in advertising. J Street pretends that it is pro-Israel and pro-peace. It is neither.
When you hide who you are on purpose and don't tell people what you're doing and they have to piece it together themselves, it's very confusing and it's very disconcerting.
Those who attack us as being anti-Israel, those who question whether or not what we are doing is in the best interest of the Jewish people, are so fundamentally mistaken, because the work that we're doing is the ultimate act of Zionism.
People aren't used to having to deal with this kind of subversion. You have to be very bold, and you have to be very educated, and you have to be very willing to say, you know what, you're not telling me the truth.
The conflict is unbearable to a younger generation. For many people, the idea that a problem doesn't have a resolution in the immediate future or even in the medium run is a completely unthinkable thing.
What Israel needs to do is be very sober and realistic, and above all, keep the interests of its own security uppermost in mind. That should be the basis of all policymaking. Not because you feel good about a policy, not because you're taking risks for peace, not because you're appeasing the editorial page of the New York Times, but because your only interest is making sure that 100 years from now, my grandchildren will be able to live and be citizens of a Jewish state still thriving.
It takes a certain kind of inner strength to say, I can live with the lack of the fulfillment of my dream as long as it takes. As painful as it is, as high as the price ever gets, because this dream is only part of a larger dream, which is Jewish sovereignty, a Jewish state, and the rebirth of the Jewish people.